Brooklyn Independent Television.
Michael Kolinsky and Suki Hawley are documentary filmmakers, husband and wife, and co-directors of Battle for Brooklyn, a film 8 years in the making that chronicles the struggles of a man and his community fighting to save their homes during the wake of the construction of the Barclays Center Arena. We recently met up with them where we discussed their intriguing projects, past, present, and future.
I'm Michael Kolinsky, and I'm one of the filmmakers behind Battle for Brooklyn. My partner Suki and I have been making films together for about 20 years, and we started out making narrative films, not documentaries, but were documents. They're usually people playing themselves, and that's when you had to shoot on film. And we had finished both of those, and those were so difficult to make because when you shoot on film, you need a bigger crew. And we got a video camera, and we made our first documentary, Horns and Halos, back in 2000, about an underground publisher republishing a discredited biography of George Bush.
He tried to diffuse questions about drug use rumors by saying he made unspecified mistakes in his youth, but that he had not used illegal drugs in at least 25 years.
I hope that people appreciate a candidate who comes along and says enough is enough. Enough is enough digging into people's backgrounds years ago.
And that's kind of the first in a series of films that we envisioned. And we made a couple other films in between there, but Battle for Brooklyn is the most similar to that. And then we're starting another film called Story of Pain right now. And their films tend to be about people who are in a story in the media, and they're usually fighting something that they feel is wrong, but that the media isn't getting. And so they're kind of usually portrayed in the media as cranks and malcontents. But through filming them over many years, trying to get their message out, we are able to give a fuller picture of what they have to say.
We started collaborating on student films that I was working on, and then that summer we started our production on our first narrative feature. This, documentary subject came up actually when we were flying back from a film festival. He could just grab the camera and I could do sound and I could interview people. It would just be the two of us running around, shooting things, and that was so liberating that that's basically how it began. When
we read about the Atlantic Yards project in the New York Times, the first thing I thought was, this sounds like a press release. But to me, it raised all kinds of questions like, where are they going to build this? There's buildings there. There are people there. So I started asking my neighbors, and they all said, the governor, the mayor, what are you going to do? Just stop. Don't even think about it, because it's a done deal. And, from my point of view, I'm always interested in the story behind the story. So I kept asking around. And then I saw a poster on the block out here, and it said, stop the project. And there was a number. So I called Patty, and she just started talking my ear off. I immediately ran over and started filming with her that day. And I followed her as she followed, she led other media people around. So by doing that, I was able to get a real sense of what the story was.
This is Joe Pastore. He lives in that building right there.
In the middle building since '67.
More than half of his project is private property that he wants to seize. Right. Why doesn't he approach each owner and say, do you want to sell?
Right. It was a long process to make this film. And when we started, we didn't know when it would end. I think Patty once asked me, how long do you think this is going to take? And I said, I don't know, 3 or 4 years. She goes, I'll be elderly by then. The first 6 months, I did shoot almost every day because there was so much going on and so much to figure out. At a certain point, it kind of fell into a pattern. I would film as events happened in the same way that the media would. At the same time, we really wanted it to be done. But anytime you write a story, or especially when you're going to make a movie, you can't really start editing until the story is done, because you don't know where you're going to be at the end.
It became close enough to where the ending would either be our main character loses or he wins, and those were significantly similar enough that we did start editing before we knew that outcome.
We did then edit full-time for almost 1.5 years, and then we've been distributing for 1 year. Because we spent so long on it, we really feel a great need to kind of keep working with it to get that story out there.
We thought of it as our next film, our second film. But of course, events ensued and we shot another whole film and finished that in the meantime. No one had any idea that this would last so long, that they would hold this, development at bay for as long as they did. It was difficult for us, but we had to wait for the ending that came. We couldn't, force it to be different than it was.
one of the things they were saying was, there's this arena, and they really controlled the message that it was this arena, and everyone's, oh yeah, basketball, housing, hoops, jobs. And the people we talked to said there's not going to be many jobs. The housing, it's not possible to build the way they're saying they're building with the numbers. It's not going to provide it. And it's going to destroy the character of all these low-rise neighborhoods around it. So that's what we really wanted to do, was document this process, hear what people who lived here were really saying, and then witness it so that in the future there would be a truth that would outlive what they had said.
We're at the site of the infamous Carlton Avenue Bridge. They promised to rebuild it in 2 years. It's 4 years later, it's still not done.
It wasn't meant to be an activist film, but to be an active film that follows a story and allows the history to exist. So we talked about before this idea of, if a developer spending $1 million a year on publicity, they're going to control the narrative. But eventually the true story comes up in this age of blogs with people like Norman Oder and films like ours. The truth does rise to the surface, and I do feel like we're in a changing environment where these truths are going to have relevance in the future. The next project is called Story of Pain, and it's about the issue of chronic pain in America, but mostly it's a portrait of Dr. Sarno, who wrote a book called Healing Back Pain, and it just has incredible success in letting people know that most of the pain that we have in this country, which is epidemic proportions at this point, is really based on emotions and stress and not structural problems. We're actually following Dr. Sarno to a Senate hearing to talk about pain and the epidemic. He's 88 years old, so it should be an interesting trip. We were not trying to influence the story as it happened, because in a way that would undermine our ability to make a movie. We felt it was more important to make a story at the end that would be relevant and not wound up as being a part of the opposition and then disregarded. It's a very hard battle to fight for us, because you want people to know what's going on. At the same time, what was more important was making a film for the ages, a film that would remake history.
Become a fan on Facebook. Like Brooklyn Independent Television.